Hello, my name is Bill. In this video I have my November wrap-up and December TBR. So I read The Spy Who Came In From the Cold by John Le Carre. So this was for the reading event Dr. November. So also I'm planning on reading all of John Le Carre, but I started with the third book instead of his first book because of the Dr. November event, where many booktubers were reading The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. So this was a very good read. So at the beginning of the book, Alex Lemus watches as the East German border guards shoot his lost agent. So picture here depicts that scene. Agents crossing the border on bicycle and get shot. So then he plays a part of a disgruntled agent forced into retirement without a pension and becoming an alcoholic so that he will be recruited as a double agent. But even he doesn't, Alex Lemus doesn't know exactly what's planned for him. So he eventually figures out what's going on. So it's a very good read. And then I read The Day of the Triffids by John Wyndham. So this was for the reading event Winter of Wyndham. So my plan is to read one John Wyndham each month until I read all the John Wyndham I have. They will all be rereads. So I read this one in the early 70s for grade 10 English class, and then read it again a few years ago, and then just read it this November. I was going to say this month, but November is already last month. So this is also a very good read. So almost everybody goes blind from watching a meteor shower, which may not be a meteor shower, may be something else. So later in the novel, he speculates about what it really was. And then there's plants, which genetically engineered plants that were genetically engineered to produce oil, but they also eat humans. And since almost everyone is blind, these plants get loose, and people are not able to avoid them if they can't see them. So the book's mainly about the few people who still can see and how they're trying to survive and rebuild society. And for nonfiction November, I read Brief History of Time, From the Big Bang to Black Holes by Stephen W. Hawking. So this was also a reread for me. Probably about 30 years ago when I previously read it. So it's a very, very good read. But I thought it would be a much quicker read than it turned out to be, because I'm somewhat familiar with all the topics in the book, but I still had to slow down to follow what he was talking about. So these first two books were less than a week to read, and this one took more than a week to read. Then I was continuing with Canterbury Tales, which I started in October. But most of the tales in here are not very interesting. But I wanted to read this before I reread Hyperion. So it's worth reading this for historical reasons, because it has influenced a lot of literature since it was written. So Canterbury Tales was written by Geoffrey Chaucer, which is it's a poem. So this retelling by Peter Ackroyd is mostly prose. So the idea is these pilgrims meet while they're on their pilgrimage to Canterbury, and each one tells a tale to entertain them while they're on their journey. So this cover picture here depicts the pilgrims riding from London to Canterbury. So I wonder how everybody can hear the tale when they're in a large group riding like that. But he doesn't worry too much about realism. So Geoffrey Chaucer lived from 1343 to 1400, Then this Peter Ackroyd version is from 2009. Yeah. And illustrations, Nick Bantock, 2009. Then I read The Voyage of the Space Beagle by A.E. van Vogt. So this was a good read, but it's a little old for my taste in science fiction. I prefer more advanced technologies in my science fiction. So this is it's a fix-up novel. So it was like 4 stories that put together to make a novel, but they fit very well together, so they're episodic, so it's the same ship and same people on the ship, and in each of the 4 episodes they encounter a different alien. So this book has inspired the Alien movie. Like the creators of Alien had ended up paying A.E. van Vogt a settlement for stealing his story. And then also ideas for Star Trek originated in this book. So I need to read more A.E. van Vogt, but I don't have any more. I have a tab here. What did I put the tab in here for? It's an example of how you imagine the technology on a giant spaceship. So it was the first time he had been on the bridge. He gazed around him with curious eyes, impressed and fascinated. In spite of its compactness, the control board was a massive structure. It was built in a series of great curving tiers. Each arc of metal was 200 feet long, and a full sweep of steps led steeply from one tier to the next. The instruments could be manipulated from the floor or more swiftly from a jointed control chair that hung from the ceiling at the end of a power-driven upside-down crane structure. So this would be in the first part, which, when was it written? So that was probably 1939. So back in 1939, they imagined that every control would have a switch or a knob and an indicator. So you need, for a giant spaceship, you need a giant control panel. So before the idea of digital controls and touchscreen displays. So this novel version was 1977. First Timescape Books, printing July 1981. So it was probably around 81 when I bought this. And I just got around to reading it now. Then I was reading some stories in Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine. So my conclusion is not to bother buying any more Ellery Queen Mystery Magazines. So none of these stories were very interesting. And the worst one was by Joyce Carol Oates, which many people talk about her, so I figured must be a good story, but it was the worst one I read in here. So in that one, the name of the story is just 3 stars. So it's about this guy who, on his calendar, where he writes down all of his appointments. He gives one star if it's just a normal appointment, 2 stars if it's more important, and 3 stars if it's very important. But he's got this one date on the calendar with 3 stars, and he didn't make any note of what his appointment was for that day. So the story's all about him trying to remember what the 3 stars are all about. And then when he can't figure it out, he takes a trip to his hometown, so he has an excuse for missing his important appointment. And then the story gets really jumbled from there. It gets hard to distinguish what's happening now and what's happening in his memories. The first story, The Iron Maiden by Doug Allen, was okay. It's basically a mystery story surrounding a sunken ship in the Great Lakes, and going out to see if there's any treasure there. And then they figure out what really happened, why the ship had disappeared. And then there's Stars of Reality TV by Brendan Dubose. So it's a story about this girl that's murdered by her boyfriend. and her mother uses that as a way to make money by getting television stations to pay her for interviews. Then there's Sign Removal Day by Michael Grimala. So that's about a politician. The day after the election, he's digging up the election sign because the law says that the losers must remove their signs immediately. But turns out that he's a winner, and he's digging up his competitor's sign because the guy lost because he died in a boating accident the day before the election. So he got fewer votes because some people were smart enough not to vote for a dead person. Then there's A Small Mercy by Alice Hatcher. What was that one about? That was the last one I read, and I don't remember it. Also, this magazine has a problem. There's from page 128. It starts over again on page 65. So everything past page 128 is missing, and page 65 to 128 is repeated. So there's one story in here I haven't read that might be interesting. That by Earl Stanley Gardner. I don't think I've read any of his books, but I hear good things about him all the time. So this one for Black Mask. Somewhere in the past, Black Mask merged with the Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine. So maybe there'll be one good story in this issue. Then I was going to read Background to Danger by Eric Ambler, but that didn't happen because they put a different book inside. So what's inside is First Light by Charles Baxter. So it's got the wrong novel inside. So I was reading this, trying to figure out what it had to do with an espionage novel from 1937, because it didn't sound like that kind of novel at all. Then here on page 11, there's some physics, which I thought was a little advanced for 1937. It's when I clued in that I wasn't reading the book that it says on the cover. So this book, there's two siblings. Hugh is a car salesman, and his sister Dorsey is a astrophysicist. So he asked his sister what she does for work. So she says, I'm working with someone else on what's called missing mass. If you take the usual calculations related to the Big Bang, you discover that there's just enough density in the universe to make it closed, to stop the expansion of space. That's called flatness. Anyway, the problem is, if you estimate density of the galaxies that are currently observed, you're missing about 80% of the mass that's supposed to be there. If you count the leptons and the baryonic matter, there's still 80% missing. It may be non-baryonic matter, gauge particles, but no one is sure. That's what missing mass is. People are even talking about shadow matter now, invisible planets, stars and galaxies that have a gravitational pull. That's what I'm working on. So, parts I read, there's occasionally a little bit of physics like that, but if you're not interested in physics, but you like literary fiction, you still might enjoy the First Light by Charles Baxter, because it's mostly about the life of the two siblings. But I didn't finish it. I got distracted. So I'm doing a buddy read of Foreigner by C.J. Cherryh. So buddy read with Scott from the Bookish Bryants. So I'm about half done so far. So this is it's a very, very good read. So very enjoyable. So I like lots of science and philosophy in my science fiction, but this one's a bit different. The science is anthropology compared to my usual hard science fiction reads, which are written by physicists. So C.J. Cherryh was an anthropologist. I think anthropologist is right, not archaeologist. So this novel has a a lot about the relationship between humans that arrived at this alien world when the aliens were at a much lower level of technology. So the humans are after they had a war, the treaty they signed, they were to gradually release advanced technologies to the aliens. So there's a lot about the communication problems between humans and the aliens, because their minds are structured differently, and lots of human words and concepts don't have direct translations into alien language, so it often leads to strange conversations. Like, he's trying to explain to the alien the idea of the relationship between people where you have a deep fondness for each other, so friendship, but the aliens have no concept for friendship. So the alien thinks he's being called a tasty dessert when the human is trying to explain friendship to him. And then, once I finish that book, I'll get on with what I originally planned for December, which was Remember December, which is to reread. So, first one is Call for the Dead by John Le Carre. So it's a reread for me. So I read it a couple years ago, but it's also the first novel by John Le Carre that also part of my read all of John Le Carre project. And then I'll read Midwich, Cuckoos by John Wyndham, which I read a few months ago. And I don't remember reading this one back in the 70s, but it's always possible. When I was reading all the John Wyndham I could find in the school library. So this is also for the Winter of Wyndham reading event. Then I plan to read Hyperion, which I read maybe 20 years ago. So it's also a reread. So this was also on my list of 23 science fiction books to read in 2023, which I'll be doing a update video on that later this month sometime, and then I'll do my 24 for 24 video. So that's all for this video. See you in the next one.